elle est en place. C'est la poudre.
Tiens, on a découpé une femme en morceaux rue de la bienséance à 2 pas du chat. Tiens, on a découpé une...
I am a feminist.
Je vous obsède avec une constance
je ne me suis pas conduit
qui appelle quand même l'admiration.
D'une façon conforme à ce qu'on attend d'une jeune fille d'abord et d'une femme ensuite.
I'm sorry that I didn't become the world's first black classic pianist.
Je crois qu'une femme qui existe dans son temps, à l'intérieur de son temps, n'a pas d'époque, elle marque son époque.
Welcome to La Poudre, an intimate, in-depth conversation with inspiring women. They are artists or activists. They are creative. They're powerful. How did they become women? What books did they read? What fights did they fight? What do they scream? What do they dream? I am Lauren Bastide, and today my guest is Reni Eddo-Lodge.
It wasn't me saying I'm never going to talk to white people full stop. It was just about race. I was making a vow to myself. I'll speak to them about anything else, their dog, their holiday, anything, but not this topic anymore because I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it anymore.
In June 2017, I went to London to attend a conference at Birkbeck University. The title of the conference was Feminist Emergency. I remember, as soon as I read about it, I jumped on the website to book my tickets. Feminist Emergency, obviously. When I got there, in spite of the sun and the busy sound of the city, there was a weird atmosphere in the air. People were sad and angered. There were leaflets on the walls, on the streets. There was another emergency, the Grenfell Tower. 1 week before, the 24 floors building had burned down. At that time, we were still counting the dead. Now we know. 71 people, aged from 6 months to 84, lost their lives there. Poor people, immigrants' sons and daughters. I remember one of the leaflets pinned on a pole said, "Grenfell is about race and class." For years, the residents of the Grenfell Tower had expressed concerns about major safety problems and the neglecting of the fire safety and building maintenance, and no one listened to them. No one. Among the victims, there was this 24-year-old artist, Khadija Say, a British Gambian photographer. Her work, captivating black and white self-portraits, had just been shown at the Viennese Biennale. She lived in the tower with her mom, and she was about to reach her dream. On that day, at the Feminist Emergency Conference in Birkbeck, we talked about Khadija Say. We looked at her work. I invite you to do so. On that day, at the Feminist Emergency Conference in Birkbeck, the emergency was not only feminist.
In 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! I don't call it rioting, I call it an insurrection.
The whites have become black.
If you open your door to uncontrolled immigration from Middle Eastern countries, you are inviting in terrorism.
That was the opening credits of Reni Eddo-Lodge podcast about race, which I encourage you to listen to right after you finish with this one. With Reni Eddo-Lodge, we talked about gender, class, and race. Reni Eddo-Lodge, you're a journalist, an essayist, and an activist, and you are the acclaimed writer of a book that has become a bestseller in the UK. You were awarded so many prizes that a journalist might hesitate to name them all, but I am going to do it because women are so rarely granted awards that it deserves to be highlighted. So you won one of the Sunday Times Bestseller Prize, the British Book Awards Nonfiction Narrative Book of the Year, the Foyles Nonfiction Book of the Year, the Blackwell's Nonfiction Book of the Year, and the Jalek Prize. Reni Eddo-Lodge, thank you so much for being here in the Monocle Studio in London.
Thank you for having me.
And it's the first interview of La Poudre ever recorded out of Paris and in English, so I'm quite excited.
Whoop whoop. Excited to be the first.
So, Your book came out in France a few weeks ago, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but there has been a tiny controversy about the title and the cover. Your book's name in English is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I remember having a crush in a bookshop in London when I saw it, like, for the first time 1 year ago, because the word white people are written in white on white, which makes it look really intriguing and also a bit provocative. In France, your title has been changed to Le racisme est un problème de blanc, which means racism is a white people problem. I think I understand why your French editor, did this, because race is really a big word in France. But it has caused a certain disappointment in the French Afro-feminist community. Do you understand why people were disappointed by this title change?
Not really.
No, you don't?
No. Well, first off, because I haven't actually had any one-on-one conversations with the people who are upset, and I don't understand French, so I don't understand the conversation that's happening around it. And Google Translate isn't very good, so I would like to have some one-on-one conversations with people who are upset about it, because what I've had on my end and on my reception is people sort of saying, did you approve this? Did you approve this?
Yes.
To which I say, yes.
Yeah.
And then that's it. That's the end of the conversation. So I'm still a bit confused. I understand that the word race doesn't land in French society in the same way that it does the English-speaking world.
Yes, it does.
But I suppose that the controversy speaks to the success of the book, the fact that I think that many people feel a sense of ownership over its existence, which is mind-blowing for me as the author. And I feel very flattered. But at the same time, I feel like, the content inside is very much the same. Because I haven't had a really one-on-one conversation with anybody who believes that the French title is wrong, I can only speculate, and I can assume that, somebody might think that the title is less strong.
Yes, I think it's the feeling, yeah. Less provocative, less strong. But I think it's also probably a misinterpretation from a French point of view of the English title, because the word race has just been erased from the constitution in France, for example. And I think some people were expecting your book to bring this debate in France. Like you say in your book, you have this sentence, you have to address race to change the society. And the eraser of the word race from the title maybe disappointed people because they felt this debate was not going to happen again.
But it has the word racism in it.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Personally for me, the title Racism as a White Problem in English, I would have been happy for that to be the English title as well. I think it's a line that I write in the book. It's just as straight to the point, just as direct as why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. I think that racism as a white problem also captures the essence of the argument that I'm trying to make in the book. In fact, I think it captures it better than why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. I think why I'm just going to say it like that because I can't be saying that sentence over and over again, is a little bit more vague and suggests an explanation. And it's actually softer than racism is a white problem, because racism as a white problem is more definitive, it's more of a statement. And I do think that is the core argument that I'm trying to make in the book. So as the author, I think the controversy has been a little confusing to me. Yeah. Because I'm like, well, I thought it was fine. But I would still like to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody. But I can just sort of say now on the record that I did approve it. I didn't choose it, but I did approve it. And I also think that it might be interesting for your listeners to know that the title of the English edition, I also didn't choose. I didn't come up with that from my head. It was my editor who suggested it to me on the basis of the original blog post. When I was working on the initial, book in English, I didn't have a title for it. In fact, I had a title, it was rubbish title that we won't even speak about. So if one of the people I'm working with suggests a title to me that I think is fitting, if I don't have, like when my English editor said, well, why didn't you call it Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race? I was like, yeah, that sounds like, I mean, again, it's a sentence that I literally came out with from my own brain. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like the essence of the book that I'm trying to write. So maybe I don't get personally with my work too wrapped up in titles. When I was a freelance journalist, you never came up with a title for your work. Never. You would just file the copy. You would file the words, and
then
the editor
would, of course,
put the title out there. So I don't feel hugely attached to it in a way that I think that some readers really do. These aren't things that, as an author, I spend a whole bunch of creative time thinking about. I didn't choose the cover for the English book edition. I was just told, well, this is what the cover is going to be. And I was like, great, looks good to me.
Well, actually, a woman on Instagram also told me she was shocked by the photo that was picked. I have the book in my hand. I'm showing you. She told me, look at the picture. She's very happy with a big engaging smile. So the editor has tried to erase her anger and radicality by choosing this picture. It makes sense. I think it's a kind of I mean, you can expect this, I guess, from a politically conscious Black woman to like analyze this kind of details. But I thank you so much for explaining how it worked. Like at no point were you were forced to accept a title or a cover you didn't accept.
No, everything's been approved by me, and the book's now been published in a number of different languages, and there have been covers that I've said flat out no to. I'm not going to tell you which publisher that was, but there have been covers that I consider to be quite offensive, not with my French publisher, but with other publishers that I've said flat out no to. In fact, once my agent was like, you know what, I'm not even going to send you these because I know you're going to hate them. But I didn't feel a visceral objection. And I recognise that with the French edition of my book, and I recognise that, packaging is important, but for me, it's about the content.
Yeah, of course. It makes sense.
I don't know. I mean, if you read the book and you, reading it is going to tell you how passionate and how angry I feel.
Yeah, of course.
And I think also, as a person who writes about serious issues, I thought it was a pleasant surprise to see a picture of me with it smiling. I was like, yeah, people think I'm just serious. And I once interviewed a comedian for my own podcast, and we were talking about the book, and she said, I think the book's really funny. Like, I think that
it is funny.
There's quite a few times where you've inject this dry humor into it, and which I was, again, pleasantly surprised by. So, I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody who feels a strength of feeling about it. But I suppose what the controversy has sort of taught me over the last few months, of people have been asking me, did you approve this? Did you approve this? It's just strange, I suppose, to have readers feel more passionately about aspects of your work than you do.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I'm like, to me, it's very flattering. It means that the book is part of a zeitgeist, part of a movement, and that's amazing. And I'm flattered by the attention, but yeah, I think I spent the last, almost 18 months since it was first published in English, just confused at the attention. But yeah.
Yeah, it's become something that's totally got his own life. It's really interesting what happened to your book and how many expectations people have around it. I'm so happy the French audience of La Poudre is going to be able to talk to you, and probably the conversation is going to go on maybe on the social media when the episode comes out about the cover. And so thank you so much for clarifying this.
But another thing I wanted to sort of say about it, I think I may have forgotten the point now, is that I'm excited that the book is being introduced to French readers. In a way that I did not have the ability to do myself. And so, I'm excited that the French publisher took it on in the first place, because I think that, having come from a background of activism myself, there's books that, we as activists, we latch onto, yes, this is our Bible, there's this, there's that, but it doesn't really go beyond our core.
Yeah.
Of, our core texts, like when you're at university and it's like, these are the key texts you need to read. And I think like the English edition of the book has gone way beyond the circles that I was frequenting as an activist, you know, all the people on the radical left, basically. And it's you know, there's people who in spheres of life who I didn't even know would ever consider picking it up. People in corporate. I mean, I think the book's quite radical. People in the police, you know, like are picking it up. And that's blowing my mind. And I think that, you know, I think that the French book, I can only hope that the title is as intriguing as the English one, and it reaches people also far beyond activist circles as well. And that is not to do down or speak negatively of activist circles. Like, activist circles are my roots. They're literally where I came up, where I learned everything. I think they're so vital to societal change fundamentally. But I also want my work to penetrate every corner of society. Now, whether or not racism as a white problem does that, I don't know, but
I think it does. I can tell you it does from the face of the people around me in the metro when I'm reading it. You know, when I have it in front of my face and I see an old woman being like, ooh. So yeah, no, I think the title is really good, actually. And I didn't feel this way at all when I received the book for the first time. I was just very excited. So anyways, thank you for sharing this with me. And so I just want to let you know that in La Poudre, I try to explore the journey of the women who impact society today. So if it's okay with you, we're going to rewind a little.
Sure, I've been listening.
Oh, cool. So Reni, you were born and grew up in London. How was it to grow up in London?
Well, I'm a Londoner through and through. I moved around London throughout my formative years. I was born in East London. I moved to South London when I was like, actually, I don't know how old, but I left South London when I was like 6 or 7 years old to North London and lived there until I moved to university in the northwest of England. And then I lived back in East London again. So very much Londoner through and through. Only lived away from the city for 4 years now. And I love London. I think that, you know, when I travel for work, it really becomes very obvious to me the unique position that I've grown up in, to grow up in a like multicultural, bustling city, different languages everywhere, different foods, and also drastic inequality where, you know, rich and poor are living cheek by cheek or cheek by jowl, whatever that saying is. If, you know, London feels like a city of opportunity, but also if you're not in the circles of opportunity, like it can feel so far away. You know, just recently, you know, when Grenfell Tower happened, 2 weeks after the book was published in English.
So it's just for the French audience, it's this building that burned down because it was like poorly made and only poor people were living in it, to sum it in a very simple way.
A tower block. We don't know if it was negligence, but that's what it looks like. I thought about that area a lot in West London. I've never lived in West London, but I used to work in the area on a market stall on Portobello Road Market, world famous market with antiques and secondhand things. And I thought about how close that tower is to some of the richest areas in the world, let alone in the city. And I think that like that's the London that I love and loathe. Like, you can really be sat next to a multi-million-pound businessman on the tube on your way into work when you're going to work as a barista. You know, like it.
Yeah.
And
did you already have this feeling as a kid?
No, I don't think so. I think that that's a perspective that I've come to as an adult, especially as I've began to travel for work and really thought about how so many people live in far more insular communities. I had the privilege of coming into contact with children from all sorts of different backgrounds growing up, and when I move around for work, I'm struck sometimes by how homogenous different places are. So
it's the contrast who made you realize how diverse and rich London was, right?
Even when I moved to the Northwest for university, I was like, people were using racial slurs that I hadn't heard in like years. And I was like, we don't say this stuff in London.
You cannot say this.
Yeah, like, I didn't have my racial awakening at that point, but I was like, why are you guys just being outwardly racist to the guy in the corner shop? Like, that was shocking to me that some of the racial slurs that they were using against Asian people in the Northwest was just like part of everyday language, which just wouldn't happen where I grew up because those kids were in your class, you know? And so, yeah, that was an eye-opener for me. But yeah, I love the city. I love being a Londoner. I don't think I'll leave unless the city prices me out.
So you were raised by your mom. I read she was a care worker with mental health patients. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what she continues to do. Actually, she's recently left the country and moved back, in air quotes, to Nigeria, which I think is a funny saying because...
Yeah, it's funny to say this.
You know, is it a return flight if there's 30 years between the landing in London and leaving? But my mum's family lived in between Nigeria and the UK, in Bradford, actually, in Yorkshire. So some of my family were born there. Yeah.
And I was wondering, because mental health is a very important part of your work. It's also one of the part I really appreciate, because in your writing, you understand how political this question is, especially for women, especially for women of color. And I was wondering if your mom transmit this through the education she gave you.
I think the best way to say is that I think watching other people's mental health problems as I grew up made me think more about preserving my own in my immediate family and my extended family.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I read that when you were 4, you wondered when you were going to become white because there were only white people on TV. You then realized there was a representation issue there. Can we say this is the first step towards activism at 4?
I don't know about activism, but it was a question that I asked. And I remember at the time, like, my mum was interested in writing short stories. She used to go to this writing club. This is after we moved to North London, so I must have been 7 or 8. She used to go to this writing club in Dalston in northeast London. It's a very hipster area now. But it used to be a poor area, and there was a bookshop there that used to hold creative writing classes. And I had asked her that question a few years back, and it ended up being in one of her short stories. Can you imagine?
That's so cool.
Well, confidentiality, come on now. That's my story to tell. So I don't know if it was a political awakening, but it's something that I think on often, and it's something that I thought about a lot when I was starting to get involved in activism, because I just remember the sense of confusion I felt at the time. And I was very confused.
Yeah.
I still, my first memory is from around the time of like 4 years old and stuff.
Yeah.
So, no, not my first memory. No, I learned to read at that time, about 4 years
early.
old. I loved to read when I was a kid. Loved, avid reader. So I felt like the world had opened up to me at that time. And that's when I was asking a lot of questions about things. And, when I was reading stuff, like, everything seemed very clear. Like, what kids' books are like. They've only got like 5 sentences in 40 pages. So
and it makes so much sense.
Exactly. Like, it all made so much sense. But when I was watching TV, I felt very confused. So I just remember this sense of confusion. Like, I'm watching this, but I'm not like them, but they're everyone, And that's what I remember overwhelmingly. And I don't remember loads from that age, apart from reading and being confused at the television because I wasn't white.
Yeah.
So I asked her this question, and I don't actually remember her response, but it must have impacted her in some way because
she wrote it down
into a short story.
Yeah, it's funny. She was writing about race too. So before, when you were a kid.
Yeah, but I've never read any of this stuff. So
oh, really?
No idea what came of those stories.
So funny. So I asked you this question about precocity because when I read about your story, I found out that you started to become involved in activism at a really young age. Actually, when you arrived at the university to study literature, you were only like 18 or 19.
I was 19, yeah.
And you became the president of the student union.
Yeah, by the age of like 21, yeah.
That's funny. I mean, it's not obvious for anyone to become involved in politics and in activism. Do you know what kind of woman you were at that time? What kind of dream you had? Do you remember why you felt it was a need for you to be an activist?
Well, I was still asking questions and, I think I've always been asking questions. And at that point, I'd moved away from London. I was in the northwest of England, a place called Preston, which nobody seems to know where it is. It's in between Manchester and Liverpool.
Okay, thanks for that. I didn't know.
The more glitzy cities of the northwest. And so I was asking questions about, women and women's representation after, doing theory on my English literature course and reading The Second Sex, which is, the universal feminist radicalization kit.
Yeah.
And after reading that, I was asking questions and getting blank faces or sometimes even hostility and aggression. When I was at university, I took on a lot of extracurricular activities and feminism was weaved into a lot of that stuff. I took on a lot of extracurricular activities because, and this is no shade to my university, it was easy. I had loads of free time and I was bored. I was quite bored, and it was like you could study your course and hang out with your flatmates who, when you're thrown together with a bunch of people who you've got very little in common with, you're not always going to get on with them. And even when you do get on with them, you've got your entire life to be insular with 4 people if you want to, but being 18 is not the time. And so I was just really hungry for knowledge and stuff and interaction and being involved in stuff. So I remember going to things like Philosophy Society. I ended up getting a job as a barista in the student union building. I was involved in a political society, the Student Left Network. I was also working on my student paper. And I was trying to do feminism and all of those things. But on my student paper, when I was writing columns about it and stuff, that was a place that I got the most pushback from the then young white male aspirational journalists, aspiring journalists who just derided me for it a lot of the time. Those people are now working journalists. I could tell you the papers they work at. Can you imagine? One of them actually congratulated me on the book. I was like, I remember everything.
I know who you are.
Exactly. I remember your behaviour towards me. They used to put up pictures of topless models in the newspaper office just to annoy and berate me and say that I was a crazy conspiracy theorist for daring to suggest that perhaps impossible beauty standards were a way of just keeping women occupied so that we couldn't instigate revolution, which
makes total sense.
Exactly. I don't think that's conspiracy theorist. But now my views on that have matured somewhat. I wear eyeliner and I continue to be upsetting white people, so I don't think it has to be either or. But yeah, so I was sort of getting involved in all of those things, and I was this ubiquitous face around the student union because I was involved in stuff, because I had so much free time on my course and I didn't want to drink myself to alcohol poisoning.
And you
with
enjoyed it, I imagine.
Exactly.
You had fun, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's what really led me to become president of the student union. When I ran for election, lots of people knew who I was. It was interesting at my university because it wasn't massively academic, but there was a lot of sports people there. And usually that student union position had been occupied by people who were basically men who were involved in football or rugby. And I was neither of those things. And I remember when I was running for election, people were well, you've got to get a sports team on side. You've got to get a sports team on side, otherwise you're not going to win. And I was but I don't want to. They're just not my people. And I feel there's loads of other people who study at this university who don't play football or rugby. And this is not me deriding sports, by the way. I actually enjoy doing solo sport, not team sport.
I'm the same. When I see a ball, I panic.
Exactly,
but it's
exactly.
Okay.
But I wanted to, get people who felt I'm not sporty, so there's no one for me to vote for. I wanted to sort of reach out to those people. And I actually beat the captain of the football team. Can you imagine? It's like some kind of
So cool.
American high school team
It
movie.
sounds like a movie, yeah.
And I think that he and his people were very shocked. And I got the job. It was my job out of university. So I ended up spending 4 years in the Northwest rather than 3. And I suppose because the job had tended to be like occupied by young men with superiority complexes, and let's just be real. Like, people were surprised at me taking things seriously, you know, because it is a job with a lot of positional power and a lot of responsibility. I think that's why I'm just going to go ahead and say I think that's why these young men wanted the job. But also it involves like being a student politician involves a lot of like traditionally female like attributes, you know.
Yeah, like communication,
soft power, communication,
and being cool with people. And yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, maybe something I brought to the role, and also, you know, taking things a little bit more seriously than a 19-year-old guy.
You probably learned so much from this experience. It's probably helping you today.
Yeah, I think that like one thing that I take from that entire time was really how to work with incompetent men. I don't work with men really in my job today. Like, I work with overwhelmingly women, which is so great because with that I worked with so many incompetent men, like, and they were all around my age. So they were all like 20, 21 at the time. And they just were used to coasting. Yeah. Like, nobody had ever said, why don't you work a bit harder? Or like actually try to earn the money that we're paying you. Like, it was maddening. It was seriously maddening. And I ended up, I was overstepping my boundary in my position and being over responsible for one of these incompetent men's jobs. And he responded with a lot of resentment and sabotaging me. And we really we locked horns a lot. And I was like, right, well, it's either me or him. Like, one of us has to go. And I know I'm the more valuable one because I actually do my job. And it all got into this like massive drama. But we actually ended up being friends by the end of the year. Like, that was a huge learning curve.
That's another American movie.
I know, right? Like, it was a huge learning curve because, you know, I think I just wasn't used to people who worked like that. I just wasn't used to it. And I'm lucky to say that I don't work with lazy men anymore, but it definitely equipped me to work with men who just coast through life before I, you know, went freelance. And another thing that I really learnt during that time, you know, being involved in the student union and then being elected SU president was I really did start to rub up some of these young men the wrong way. Like, I think 4 different men shouted at me
oh my God.
throughout that time period. Sort of like shouted at me, screamed in my face. And, you know, I mention it in the book as well. Like, the more politically assertive I became and the more I spoke up on behalf of myself and for other people, the more men shouted at me. Like, that's literally what happened.
Yeah.
And no man has ever shouted at me again because probably after I left uni, I was like actively avoiding working with them.
Yeah.
And obviously not all men, right? But most. So I would get shouted at by men my age all the time. And it was usually something to do with undermining their authority in a way, which was so weird because I was a person with the literal positional authority as student union president. But because I didn't, I don't know,
so interesting,
lie down on the ground and let them walk all over me, they started to scream in my face.
I'm sure any prime minister woman would like totally understand what you're saying right now.
I know. When I was like winding up during that time, I had some people pushing me to actually go into politics, like actual politics.
Yes.
And I was like, but I don't want to compromise with these people anymore. I just want to do my own thing.
Reni, were you born a woman or did you rather become one?
I think I became a woman during that time period. Definitely. Because, you know, I saw men being assertive. And when I was assertive, people were like, that's bad and wrong.
Yeah.
So I definitely became a woman. And I think like becoming more involved in political activism and sort of, you know, spending more time with other women. You know, while I was at university, I made a big effort to sort of get around the country and meet all sorts of different women involved in feminist activism. That's when I started to feel like, yeah, I am a woman. Whereas before I didn't really think about gender.
That's interesting. So there are many differences and also many similarities between French and British history of racism. I kind of have a theory. I think that everything that happened in Britain happened 10 years later in France. So it enables me to predict that the far right will end up winning in France in 8 years, about 10 years after the Brexit. I'm sorry, I'm very pessimistic those days. So I would like you to tell me about the Stephen Lawrence story, which I read about for the first time in your book. It reminded me of the Zied and Bouna story. I don't know if you heard of the story of these two young boys who died after being chased by the police in 2005, and their death sparked riots in the French suburbs. So the deaths of Stephen Lawrence happened in 1993. You were a baby. Mm-hmm. But one of the murderers was finally condemned in 2012.
Yes.
And I think it has had a very big impact on your understanding of the problem of race in Britain. Can you explain it in a simple way for the French listeners?
Of course. So in 1993, I was a baby. He was, I think, 18 at the time. He was a teenager, so don't quote me on his age. But Stephen Lawrence was walking home from his uncle's house with a friend. And while they were walking to the bus stop in South London, a group of 5 white boys approached them and attacked them, beat them up. The friend fled, called out to Stephen and said, follow me, or something along those lines. But Stephen he was flawed, basically. He was flawed. And he died. They beat him to death. Stephen ran for a short amount of time. And I remember the Stephen Lawrence inquiry notes that he ran for a remarkable amount of time considering how injured he was. So he did run with his friend, but he died. And that's horrific in itself. But what's more horrific is how long it took the criminal justice system to investigate that murder and convict anyone. So as I sort of recount in the book, when the Metropolitan Police began to try and investigate this murder, there was mistake after mistake after mistake that happened. There was an incident where actually names of the people who beat Stephen Lawrence up were written down on a little piece of paper and put in a phone box. And the person who did that, we still don't know who it was, indicated to the police that that's what they'd done. And it wasn't investigated. And that would have cut a decade out of the proceedings, right? So repeatedly over and over again, Stephen Lawrence's family were failed. His friend was at points treated like a suspect. It was absolutely horrific. And his family and those close to him constantly mounted a sort of campaign for justice. It's since been revealed very recently that some police officers were actually spying on that campaign for justice at the time. So they wasted their resources spying on the people organising for justice instead of looking for the criminals.
Oh, that's crazy.
So in 1999, the results of an inquiry were published in Britain, investigating what went so wrong in the aftermath of Stephen Lawrence's death. Why did it take so long to convict anyone? Why were the killers still free? And those report results were published in 1999, so I was still a child at the time. But one of the things that the report sort of concluded was that the Metropolitan Police at the time were institutionally racist. Mm-hmm. And that definition was described as a kind of subtle bias that didn't take the concerns of people who were not white seriously, which led to terrible miscarriages of justice. And I should say that in the time between 1993 and 1999, the press jumped on the story of this racist attack that led to a death. So rather than it being, a small section in the bottom of the newspaper, it was front page news, which really added the pressure onto the Metropolitan Police. And the closer it got to the inquiry being, published, the more pressure was mounted. So that verdict of institutional racism came out. And then I don't go into this in much detail in the book, but there was also a backlash to that. And between 1999 and, the next decade was a lot of op-eds in certain newspapers saying, well, this is going to make the police, scared to do their jobs, etc., etc.
It also corresponds to the date of this act in 2000 that you mentioned in the book, and also in your podcast. I listen to your podcast a lot. And you said there is a backlash also after this act. What's the name of this act, Anti-Racism Act again, that was taken in 2000 in England? The Race Relations Act?
Yeah. It would have been an update to the Race Relations Act, I think. But I haven't read that section of the book in a while.
But it's funny how you show that when there is a certain consciousness of the problem, the backlash is like a second away.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that what's interesting to note is also between the time in which Stephen Lawrence was attacked and the time when the inquiry was published, there was a change of government. So Britain moved from a Conservative government to a Labour government. And I also discuss this in the podcast and speak to some of the activists who were organising at that time. Around that transition of government, around the election, like anti-racist activists in Britain were really putting pressure on the Labour Party, saying, we will not vote for you unless you do right by Stephen Lawrence and his family, and also attempt to try and address institutional racism across society. So I think for anti-racist activists, that verdict of institutional racism in the police was a real win, because it was something that people had known anecdotally, known in the back of their minds for many, many years.
Yeah, and finally there was a name put on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. There is a very intense chapter in your book about white feminism, where you put it very simply and clearly how hard it is for a Black woman to put forward the issue of race in a discussion about patriarchy. What interests me a lot is the consolation you seem to have found in a group of Black feminist women. It is very hard to make people understand in France how non-mixity can help. So maybe you can explain how it helped you.
Oh, non-mixities.
I don't know if you can translate it this way in English.
So basically like separate spaces or something.
Separate spaces, that's it, thank you.
Well, it's not for Nazi reasons.
No, I know.
Although I think that's what people immediately jump to.
Maybe, yeah.
Rather, it's... and I wouldn't say that it's perfect. It doesn't always work. But the intention is, okay, so if you get people who are facing the same things in the same room, then they'll be able to relate to one another more around those things. Because, as I sort of like recount in that chapter, which is intense, because you may have be able to tell I had a lot to get off my chest.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you'd be talking with a group of feminists and you think, we're all like-minded, we all get it. And then one of them would be like, well, actually, I think that's racist to me as a white woman and I'm really offended and I'm going to cry now. Let's all direct the energy in the room to looking after my feelings. And that happened over and over again. So I think for me being involved in a group of Black feminists, which is what the group called ourselves at the time, like perhaps we would call ourselves women of colour feminists now, terminology is changing. It was important to be able to talk about sexism and racism without being worried that a white woman was going to get offended. And that's why we did it. And it was really just as simple as that. And I suppose it was an affront to white women to even the suggestion that they may be offended them. But they also proved over and over again that they were offended when we said racism exists and it's hurting us. Because they, for some reason, interpreted that as you
are racist.
You, Lauren, are a racist person, which is not what we were saying.
No.
I think when we were trying to question some of the white-dominated priorities of feminist groups, and when I was being involved in feminism, there was a lot. It was very white with a capital W, and it wasn't just white concerns. It was also a certain type of white person. She tended to be older. She tended to be a mother. She tended to be middle class, a little more wealthy. So she was concerned with things like pink clothing for girls and topless magazines and the newsagents and pole dancing clubs, which basically I didn't care about any of those things. Because, if a child likes pink, who am I to fight with them? Let them just develop their own tastes in the future. Pole dancing and lap dancing clubs, I was like, well, I don't think it, creates a situation where a great one for women's representation, but everyone needs to make money, and I'm not going to get in the way of those women's money. I cared about things like domestic violence, like, and, housing and, the way that existing inequalities impacted worse on women because women are women, So when I was involved, it was very like white middle-class mummy, and not to deride those women, just saying that their concerns are not the concerns of all women, right? I've forgotten the question now, but basically that's a feminist.
No, but being in a space, how did you call it again? A separate space?
Oh, yeah.
It enabled you to question the things that you were really like felt the urge to question, and not like adapt to the agenda of these women who were preoccupied by the color of their baby's clothes.
Yes, and I think that the whiter women in the room also felt that us talking about stuff to do with race was dividing things rather than just adding a new perspective to the room.
Yes.
So it was very refreshing to go back to Black feminists. And I think that one thing that we were doing in Black feminists, we're talking about how patriarchy changes with culture, which it does, and how, I think trying to pipe up on and advocate for feminism as a woman of colour in Black communities, in quotation marks, particularly in like anti-racist circles, like surrounded by men, like they were still doing sexist stuff, and it was hard, I think, to talk about that with white women, because some of those white women had quite racist, how to describe this, like racist ideas, that's it, like racist ideas about Black men, which was like, okay, so I can't talk to you about this because then you're going to start saying racist stuff and then I'm going to have to defend them when I'm really trying to criticize them right now, so it really did make you feel like, I describe it in the book, like between a rock and a hard place,
Yeah. You felt like you were a prisoner, you used the word, I think.
Like you can't...
stuck in the middle or something.
Like you want to be involved in anti-racism, but it's full of men who are incompetent and useless trying to shut you up. You want to be involved in feminist like organising, but it's full of women who are white, who are crying every time you say racism is a problem, and maybe you may have some white privilege that you want to unpack.
It reminds me, I think it's Angela Davis who said that all women are white and all Black are men, or something like that, right?
Exactly, and I think that like my experience with the book thus far is that the overwhelming people who I see at the events that I do are women. I think that's really interesting, like this anti-racist narrative that has a chapter on feminism, because I am a feminist, like it brings women out, and I'm like, I wonder where the men are at. I suppose like they're waiting for a man to just say exactly the same thing that I'm saying, who they can feel they can support. And of course, I'm not going to say not all men. There are some amazing, great like men who I see at my events, but it's always overwhelmingly women. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. Good call. So you were one of the first journalists in the UK to bring intersectionality into the mainstream dialogue. People who listen to my podcast regularly are used to that concept, but I will remind quickly that this term has been coined by an American jurist called Kimberly Crenshaw. She was stressing the specific discrimination women of color endure, especially in the judiciary system, and it has since been used to point out the combination of gender, race, class, disability, and sexuality discriminations in our society. Anyways, one day, 4 years ago, you were on the BBC radio trying to explain this concept, and a white feminist woman told you it was divisive and caused her to be bullied online. It caused a big stir at the time, and it ended up with you being bullied too, I think.
Yes.
What happened?
Oh, well, we're going back to like 2013, 2014. Those were difficult times to be a feminist on the internet, honestly. And I was a feminist on the internet because I was like blogging as well as doing activism and tweeting and all of this stuff. And I suppose those divisions that I described, a little bit earlier, of white women really feeling like it was an affront, that stuff had definitely moved online. And I think that there was a lot of bad feeling. It was like there was camps. There was the white feminist camp and the women of colour camp. And it wasn't just women of colour camp. It was just like everyone who wasn't a white, not trans, like able-bodied, middle-class, or at least appeared to be middle-class feminist was in another camp. So and we were seen as like rabble-rousers. But part of my doing work online and sharing and writing and blogging about feminism on the internet meant that I was often invited to, be part of these media conversations, which was interesting to me because I was literally so broke and poor and then being invited to these like grand, places to talk about feminism. And one of those was BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll definitely talk about it. I was the only black woman on the panel. It was me, Laura Bates from the Everyday Sexism Project, you may know it. And it was also a woman named Caroline Criado Perez who had done a campaign that year about getting women onto a UK banknote. Mm-hmm. And for running this campaign and saying, let's get a woman onto a UK banknote, people had sent her death threats.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very reasonable.
Yeah, logical. I mean, it's really shocking.
Yes,
it's a
exactly.
demand that could really destroy the world.
So that was happening. And that happened the whole year prior to us going on this panel. She was also very known at the time for receiving online abuse, as well as being a feminist in the public eye. So the topic of intersectionality comes up on this radio show. I'm asked to define it, so I do. To which Caroline responds, yes, and I think everything that Reni's saying is really important, but this is also being used to bully me online. I was not one of those bullies, so I'm then asked, well, what do you make of that, Reni? So that was really disturbing to me because, I mean, you can even go back and listen to the broadcast. I'm just like, I don't know.
I was not talking about that.
Exactly.
Reminds me of the situation you were describing earlier in the feminist group in your university when white women feel offended suddenly because you talk about racism and you're like, we're not talking about your feelings right now.
And she was being harassed and bullied at the time online overwhelmingly. So when I left that studio, and it felt like everybody was on Twitter at the time, like every freaking feminist in the UK was on Twitter at that time. So I was like inundated with feedback that was like, you are the bully, Reni. You have been harassing Caroline and sending her death threats.
And of course there was a misunderstanding, I imagine, about this, But
I also think it was, for me, I felt shocked that she would raise that in that context.
Yeah.
She later apologised, later on that day, saying, I'm sorry for bringing it up in that circumstance. And, she said something along the lines, I definitely have been bullied, but it wasn't you who was bullying me. But by that point, it was too late. Yeah. And a former Conservative MP, Louise Mensch, weighed in because she was paying attention to the conversation because she decided that she was a feminist. I don't know. And she was like, yeah, Reni, you are the bully.
Come on.
There was a lot of distrust against me and other women of colour at that time in the UK, as though we were disruptive and we were ruining the feminist movement. And that I received the sharp end of that after that radio conversation where I was being told repeatedly, like, you are destroying the feminist movement by trying to put forward a race analysis because this is attacking us. That is what happened at the time, and I was absolutely devastated.
And this is finished now? You're talking about this in the past because this is happening in France right now, so let me dream it's going to be over someday.
I don't know if it's continuing to happen in the UK. I think, my values will always be rooted in feminism. I cannot be an anti-racist without having rooted values in feminism. Otherwise, men will just shout and scream over me and I'll never get a word in edgeways. So I will always be a feminist, but the feminist activism that I support now is very different from back then. Basically, if it's got nice middle-class white ladies at the front of it, I'm just like, oh, well, that's not for me then, is it? I'll just avoid. And that's just because I've been burnt. And I think that, one of the sentences in the book that I talk about, that I say is something like, at that time, women of colour were being treated like how we treat immigrants. Like they're the source of all social problems in this movement right now. Like that's how women of colour in feminism in the UK were being treated. And there was this sort of feeling, we can only have real unity if these women get in line. And that's what capital W white feminism was doing at the time. It's very interesting now with the book. I do different events and so many well-meaning white women come to them. And I'm just like, well, I'm glad that you're here to learn. Pick up a copy of the book.
You know what? I had a question I wanted to ask you later, but I was like, How do you cope with these feminists who I think express sincerely their guilt and sorrow to you, so as their white privilege? I mean, I guess it's a good thing they realize it. I realized how privileged I was at some point thanks to the work of women of color, but I'm not sure their guilt and sorrow is making you feel better about it.
Well, I'm not here for guilt and sorrow. I don't.
Yeah.
If you feel guilt and sorrow, then you must talk about it with somebody else. I mean, not you in particular, but broadly, any white woman listening.
Yeah.
Don't bring it to your local black feminist because you don't hear it.
Yeah, all these women saying sorry and I mean, they're probably good attention behind, but I'm not sure it's good at giving you the good energy, right?
No, I've said in interviews before that, if as a white person suddenly the smoke is pulled from your eyes, you're like, oh my God, this is a massive problem. Don't go to speak about it with a person of colour. We know.
We're aware of it.
Yeah, we're good, thanks. Why don't you talk about it to a white person, and get them to think about these things instead,
Actually, we're getting to the point where I wanted to get right now. It's the blog post that changed your life, because it's mainly this subject about this conversation that you don't want to have anymore. So why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. This post paved the way to the book 3 years later. It actually really changed your life. Do you remember the energy you were in when you wrote it?
Oh, yes, I was done. It was a breakup letter. I didn't want to do it anymore. I say in the book, I'm quoting the book all the time because I know it off by heart at this point. But, I was writing a breakup letter to whiteness, capital W whiteness. I didn't want to do it anymore. I felt very and I have to describe it as a breakup letter because have you ever been in a relationship and suddenly you have that thing and you're like, I have to break up with this person.
Yeah.
It has to end.
Yeah.
I cannot continue anymore. That's how I felt. It was heavy. It was depressing, but a strong sense of certainty as well.
Yeah.
That I can't do it.
You knew it was the right thing to protect yourself also, right?
I actually remember, I remember feeling wired when I was writing it, feeling almost like an out-of-body experience. And the circumstances that led me to writing it, well, it was a month after all of that stuff on the radio just happened. So I'd been dragged over the coals. So there was that background. And then there was also a friend had recommended that I watch a film called The Colour of Fear, which Oprah had championed in the early 90s. And it was a film about race relations where 5 men were in a room, 2 were white, 3 men of colour, and they were trying to talk about racism. And one of the white men just didn't want to hear it. And he was just denying their experience over and over again. And I watched this and I was like, wow, this is literally never going to change. And again, you have to relate it to a relationship. You've been in a relationship with somebody who's doing something that you don't like and you realise they'll never change. And I had that realisation and I was like, it has to end.
I'm losing my time.
It has to end. And, it wasn't me saying I'm never going to talk to white people full stop. It was just about race. I was making a vow to myself. I'll speak to them about anything else, their dog, their holiday, anything, but not this topic anymore because I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it anymore.
I can really, I think sometimes I feel I don't want to talk about sexism with men anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
I can totally concur.
I mean, so many white women have said all of those feelings and I feel them with men.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree. I can't remember the last time I spoke about sexism with a man who I wasn't in a relationship with, you know, because you just, and it's like I say in the blog post, first you see the physical signs, their eyes shut down and harden, their shoulders get all tense. It's like they're getting into the arguing stance to argue with you and to deny everything that you said. It's like, that's it.
Yeah.
The mask goes down and you're not a human to them anymore. You're just an argument. You're just a concept for them to debate away. They want to play devil's advocate. But, I always say the devil is fine. Doesn't need advocates.
Yeah, it's true.
Just don't say, if you're going to argue with somebody, don't say devil advocate. Say, I believe this.
I am the devil.
Exactly.
So it also had very big consequences for you because you became like the go-to person for all the race issues. And I listened to you in an interview, recent interview, where you said that you now protect yourself from all this solicitation you get. Like you're invited to debate, you're asked like, what shall we do? How can we stop racism? And I really appreciate the way you present this as self-care, like you don't answer to a question you're prepared to answer. You don't participate to a debate that is not in your own terms. How important is it in your life today, this self-care thing you created?
It's so important. I think, I used to talk about boundaries a lot, but, after the book came out, I became very anxious because it was like my inbox was full. There was so much expectation on me, and like it was just I felt very overwhelmed, and so I stopped talking about boundaries and I actually implemented them. Just earlier today, actually, I was at a thing that wasn't anything to do with me and my work, and someone tried to make small talk with me and say, "Oh, so why did you write?" And I was like, I'll be honest with you, it's my job to answer that question and I don't want to right now.
Yeah, but
I don't want to.
Totally okay. It's totally okay. I mean, we women are always expected to be nice and smiley, and it would be totally okay for a man to be like, "Oh, sorry, I'm not in a good mood. So why couldn't we do this?"
I was like, I've done 50 interviews. You just need to Google and there's your answer. And I do that a lot. I did it once at a birthday party for a good friend of mine, and it changed the tone of the evening. When somebody again tried to jovially ask me, "Oh, so why did you write the book?" And I said, "I don't really want to talk about work," because it is work at this point.
Of course.
And it's not really that I'm in a bad mood. It's just that explaining myself on this topic is now my job. So, and if you're a teacher and then you're walking down the street and someone just hands you a chart and say, "Can you teach my child maths?" You'd be like, "No, I don't want to teach your child maths. I'm going to the supermarket."
Such a good point.
Right? So for me, getting back a sense of sanity involved really going back to basics and saying, okay, well, why am I doing this? I've always wanted to write for a living. And this particular book was something that it was a point that I'd been trying to make for the best part of a decade by the time it was published. I'd been trying to make the point since I was 19, since I was becoming awakened to feminism at my university, and race just slotted into that. It was very natural for me. But I think the exposure and the spotlight, people respond to things that are put right in front of their faces. And when you do publicity for a book, you're right in front of people's faces. I was asked, "Can you come here? Can you come there? Can you do this? Can you do that?" And I had to say, no, like the job that I'm doing is not, I didn't agree to be a public advocate forever,
Yeah.
I want to write books. I want to think, carefully about the stuff that I write. And I want the book to speak for itself. I don't want to be a person in the public eye saying these things. I want people to, and I think with this topic in particular, it can be misconstrued often by people with ill intentions,
yeah.
But it's often misconstrued.
It needs a book and 7 years. You spent 7 years working. Well, it's the result of 7 years of working and researching. So it cannot be summed up in a conversation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not an article, not really even a blog post. It needs space. And I wanted the book to make that argument, not just for me, but for every reader who felt the same way and wanted to evidence it. I wanted the book to make that argument.
Totally.
I didn't want to be the person making that argument in the press.
No.
Because I don't want to be a talking head in the press. Like, that's not something that's ever interested me. Since the book has come out, I've been asked over and over again. I had to change my number because it was too much,
Wow. And how about the social media? Because you don't have you have an Instagram account. There is only one post on it, and it's a post that talks about this. Also, like the mental health you're trying to preserve by coping with this attention you're getting. How toxic is social media to you?
I think it's difficult. I think sometimes people ask me questions or hold me to account. So, for example, your first question was one that people have been asking me on social media a lot, about the title change, which social media isn't always a right space to answer it. And I don't want to come off as defensive or rude. I would prefer to have a one-on-one conversation with people about it,
I understand. Yeah.
So there's that. And also I think like social media, that and other questions as well, that I would rather have a one-on-one conversation with somebody about things so that we understand each other a bit more and understand where we're coming from, rather than just feeling like, oh, they said this, now it's time to come back with that. And also I think that like social media was, when I was using it before, was this it was creating a false sense of familiarity between me and my readers. And I recognise that many of my readers feel a strong connection to the book and the argument it's making. And as an author, that's all you want, you know. All you want, I think, as an author is to be understood. For me, clarity is really important. It's amazing that not only people understand the book that I've written, but they also feel understood by it and give it to other people so that they can understand the topic. Like, that's incredible. That's my only goal. But that strength of feeling, I think, was being transferred to me as an individual. And yes, the book came out of my brain, but it's not me. So when somebody comments on my social media saying, I love you, I'm thinking, well, you love the book. You don't love me because you don't know me. You don't know the attributes of my personality. We could not even get on in life. You know, we simply don't know. And that was making me feel quite uncomfortable. I think, you know, it's a feature of being an author now that also curating a personal brand is expected, but I decided that I don't want to.
Yeah, I think it's healthy.
Yeah.
But also it's because you've had a blog for so long. You've been blogging since you were 19.
Yes.
I loved reading your blog as much as I loved reading your book. And I read about a personal health issue you've had 2 years ago. You actually turned it into an article for Broadly. So you were losing so much blood from your period since you were a teenager that it caused you like terrible anemia. You had to rest for a month. All your strengths were gone because of your period. And no one ever told you that. No doctor ever told you that. So that leads me to a question that I asked to all of my guests. So please don't be scared. Okay. How do you get along with your uterus, Reni?
Well, if you've read the article, you know,
I know.
Amazingly well.
I hope you're getting better now.
Well, actually, no. I was just diagnosed with anemia again a couple of months ago.
Oh.
I think I was talking about this with my therapist, and we kind of worked out that in times of intense stress in my life, it tends to be when I become very anemic. So I have fibroids, which is something that a lot of women with African heritage have. It tends to be hereditary, and that they live in the uterus. They're like non-cancerous growths. So they've been trying to kill me ever since I started getting my periods. And it seems that my body reacts to stress in a very adverse way. So when I wrote that article, I just had a blood transfusion a few months previous because I was almost like passing out. The way anemia works is that your blood cells, you have a lack of iron in your body, which means that your blood cells can't carry oxygen around your body anymore. And it starves your body of oxygen. You can't operate normally. And it's not unlike carbon monoxide poisoning, actually. So you just start to feel very slow and fatigued. And suddenly, you know, a small 20-minute walk to the supermarket that I could do quite easily, I'd had to start taking the bus because I didn't have the energy for it anymore. And I ended up getting admitted to hospital because my iron levels were so low, like I was in danger. So just recently I was diagnosed with anemia again, and it made perfect sense, actually. I'd had this really intensely stressful year with the book.
Yeah.
A lot of spotlight, a lot of expectation on me, a lot of travel, a lot of people coming up to me in a very emotional way and who I didn't know, sort of like pouring out their hearts to me, which is such a privilege to know that my work has made a connection with people that way. But as a naturally introverted person, I was like, huh?
Yeah. So much energy asked from you. I mean, it
exactly.
makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And boom. Next thing you know, doctor's like, yes, you're anemic again. You have to go back on your medication. So I think that like my relationship with my uterus and my body as a whole is something that I'm trying to really implement more self-care about and you know, recognize the signs and try to alleviate stress. And part of alleviating stress is moderating how much in the deep end I want to go with my work. At the moment, I'm very much in the shallow end. I've tried to really keep it there. I could, if I so wished, if I wanted to at this moment in time, I could have a television show. I could be on UK TV all the time talking about how racism is bad. I could have done 4 different radio programs for Radio 4. I'm literally asked to do these things all the time. And I choose not to go into the deep end because I know that my body will literally shut down. So, and that's helping. That's helping. Yeah. I remember years and years ago, long before I was a freelance journalist and long before I was a successful author, you know, my doctor said to me, yeah, you're going to have to like manage stress if you want to live life with these fibroids. Just try and avoid stress. And at the time I was like,
you didn't hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I was working this very low paid job that had a very long commute. And I was like, avoid stress. Stress is literally part of how I earn money right now. But it's not the case for me anymore. I have the luxury and the privilege, because I'm a successful author, to take life at my own pace. And it's something that I'm really working hard on reminding myself, because I can go as fast or as slow as I want to. And I prefer to go slowly, but because the book has done so well, the interest and the demand means that there's a lot of expectation for me to go very, very fast. But I turned down the TV show because I don't want to go fast.
You don't have to.
No, I want to go slow, and slow work makes the book, you know? Mm-hmm. Slow, long, in-depth sort of research and thinking makes the book. And I can't think creatively if I'm going a million miles an hour.
And you cannot create if you don't have a room of your own. So do you have access to your room of your own, Reni?
I do have a physical office, actually. And I have since I moved into the house I'm currently renting. And my boyfriend has a desk in there, but he never uses it because I think there's just an understanding that it's my room.
That's great. Good job here.
Yeah. And it's, you know, where I do all of my work. It's not where I wrote the whole book. I wrote the book in the kitchen and then moved up to my actual office for edits. But yeah, I love it in there. The light floods in. I've got lots of house plants, lots of wonderful things, files and stuff. It's great.
And you manage to be alone and not obsessed by what's going on outside. And
no, I do get interested in what's going on outside. The windows look out onto the street, so I do sometimes see very entertaining things, and it can be distracting, especially if you're trying to procrastinate. I've seen all sorts. I saw an old man shouting at and abusing his wife, elderly. Elderly. I was like, shocked.
Wow.
I also saw one of my neighbours' cars get towed by the bailiffs once. That was very distracting. I see some terrible things outside of that window.
You should get curtains. You're never going to get your other book written.
That's true, yeah. Because, you know, sometimes it's like a TV show, just standing at that window watching, you know, the happenings of my street go by. She's got another car now, so it's fine. But yeah, love my room.
Reni, what does la poudre, the powder, means to you?
I suppose powder invokes talcum powder, the smell of talcum powder. And which is a smell that I love. I recently acquired a perfume that smells like talcum powder. It's called Powdered Veil. That's not brand sponsored or anything, but I acquired this perfume because I went to an event and they were giving it. It was like an event that I was invited to as an author, and they were giving away these samples, and I absolutely love it. And it reminds me of babies, you know, talcum powder and babies, dusting it on them and stuff. It's a wonderful smell. So that's what invokes for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reni.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was recorded by Bill Leuty at the Monocle Studio in London, whom I thank so much for their professionalism and warm welcome. La Poudre is a podcast by Nouvelles Écoutes, produced by Aurore Meillard-Mailleux, prepared by Disla Tortello and Laura Cuissard, and mixed by Laurie Galigani.